Absolutely.
You're on mute, JP.
Who put me on mute?
You put yourself on mute.
How did I put myself on mute?
I don't know, but we couldn't hear you when you were saying that.
How do we do this again? Restart.
No, let's just keep it going. This is how we do it. We just keep it rolling.
Hi, guys.
Fuck. Fuck. That's all I have to say. Fucking welcome to the Absolute Game of Nerds with the Salt and Pepper, and let's fucking see. We have Newsstand on here, 9.9 the Newsstand. The third time he's been on our show. He's going to get a special shirt to wear that has a 3 on it, just like they do at Saturday Night Live. So, Rohan, let's reintroduce our guest for the third time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So our first ever 3-time guest, third time appearance. We have Manu, the 9.9 Newsstand, good buddy of ours from way back. So happy to have you on, Manu. How you doing?
I'm honored, man. That's awesome. Am I really the first time, or is that just what you say to everyone?
You are the first. You are the first.
I'm the first 3. I am honored. Thank you. And yeah, man, it's great to be here. And of course, you and I have talked a little bit recently, but it's going to be nice to catch up in this context. We haven't, but JP, you and I have not caught up in quite some time. So it's really nice to be hanging out with you guys. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've obviously had, we should also cover real quick. We've had a few people that have you're the first 3-time in terms of our weekly episode, like interview format.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. We've done like some live stuff. Like I did the things with Mike where we did every week with the House of the Dragon. So aside from you're the first 3 times, but anyways, obviously that being your 3rd time, we don't need to start with our usual question, which is what is your origin story? Because we've already heard that. I'll link our previous episodes and you can check that out. What I want to talk about, Manu, so previously, right now, the last time we had you on was over a year ago. And from then forward, right? Like we've always known you as high grade, 90s nostalgia, Todd McFarlane, symbiote Spider-Man, that kind of genre.
Right.
Since as the world has evolved, I feel like you have become kind of the foremost and frontmost news authority in all things comics grading aspects of what's going on in the grading world. Right. And we don't need to rehash a lot of the stories that have been talked about by numerous channels on numerous occasions, even by yourself. But what I am curious about, so I would say it all started, I'm guessing, right when you discovered that scandal with the book that was switched out. Do you think that begot the others and then rolled in the sense that had that not happened, do you think what would have happened since then have evolved to where it is today? Or do you think that kind of snowballed from that?
Wait, do you mean how that affected me and sort of my
let's say it this way. So you kind of broke the news on the CGC scandal with the books getting switched out.
Yeah.
Right? From then, you've then reported on numerous CGC stories, right?
Right.
Then also, in addition to that, you've also been the one that's been at the front of the PSA grading front.
Right.
Had you not discovered the book switching scandal, do you think the subsequent events would have happened similarly?
Right. So I'm going to answer 2 ways, because I think you're just talking about the question that I have for you is the subsequent events as it would pertain to me, like my involvement, because that obviously affected my involvement in the things themselves. Okay, got it. Sorry, that's what I thought you meant. That absolutely it's kind of like it either what's the thing that people talk about during the pandemic? Things like got accelerated. So it either accelerated what my position in this community would be, or it created sort of an entirely new trajectory, right? Or carved out this additional path in this lane of mine. Because my lane has always been one of independent criticism, one of like, I'm not beholden to any brand. If something needs to be talked about, if something needs to be made right, I want to have, and I want to articulate my opinion on that, my how that makes me feel and what I think needs to happen. I've always been rather outspoken. But yes, absolutely, with what happened in December, it certainly brought many more eyeballs to my page, and people were more people were not necessarily like more willing to listen. Like my friends that I had been engaging with for years prior, we were always we were always in these conversations, but that definitely put me in a place where that was the first time many people had seen or heard of me at all. So that's how they thought of me. They thought of me as the high grade snob that is going to do detective work and put it in front of you why he's discovered what he's discovered and what it might mean and what we should as a community perhaps attempt to do about it. That was their introduction to me. So that's what they've come to expect from me since. So it's interesting. It's like the community that was with me for years prior, they're getting this, they're now all involuntarily part of this thing where I'm reporting on much more than I used to. And they're like, bro, we just want to see the cool Mark Jewelers, you know? and then all of the people that came as a result of the reporting, for lack of a different word, anytime I share something, it's almost kind of like for them, like, where's the drama? You're just talking about collectibles. How are you showing us a CGC book? You're the guy that tears CGC a new one, you know? So it's like this conflict. But ultimately, everyone comes to realize that's what the 9.9 Newsstand is. The 9.9 Newsstand is me, of course, but beyond that, it's this idea that you and I and JP and I, we've discussed, for me personally, about seeking out the highest grade, hardest to find forms of nostalgia, right? These things that I really appreciate, and then leveling up the challenge of what I'm trying to accomplish. Like, I've got the 316, now I want the Newsstand, the 9.8 Newsstand, the Mark Jewelers, the yada, yada, you know, increasing that level of that challenge for myself. And with that comes, because I'm so detail oriented and I actually really care about this stuff, with that comes with a concern for anything that might screw up our community that we enjoy engaging in, right? So I've always been that individual, and I've always been outspoken about things. But yes, that put, what's the word? What's a loudspeaker on it? I really don't know.
Yeah,
So
it
now,
put you on the map essentially for that kind of lane, as you described.
Put a spotlight
it
on
did.
Put a spotlight
And
on
I love it, and I embrace it, and I own it, and I want to continue to be a part of it, right? Recently, Mickey, shout out Swagglehas, Swag recently asked me a question as well. He goes, how do you decide what to talk about and what not to talk about? Because, you know, there are people listening. And for me, the gauge I use is, how important is it to me? Is it something that can harm people in the community, you know, to a significant enough extent that it needs to be specifically discussed rather than like an overall message about how to be careful in a certain environment? And is it just farming drama unnecessarily? Because that's not what I like to do. And Mickey and I had this conversation. He used a quote, and I really appreciate that quote. And I'm going to mess it up too. But, you know, the idea of the quote is, small minds talk about people, medium minds talk about events, medium-sized minds, large minds talk about ideas, right? And so I don't want to go after the one whatnot guy that keeps selling nonsense to people and keep, you know, hammering some individual's name. I don't want to do that. Events, definitely. When they're worth talking about, absolutely want to. But the thing about an event that spurs a real conversation is that it usually does transition into a greater idea, right? So like when I'm criticizing something that a grading company is doing wrong, whether it's unfair, whether it's criminal to a certain extent, whatever the case might be, the reason isn't to attack that one grading company. The reason isn't to talk about Banana Gate over and over again, which I think is a hilarious name for it, Banana Gate, whatever.
It is funny.
It is funny, right? The reason is to discuss the idea of, in this community, we as people that engage with graded items, whether we grade them ourselves or buy graded, there's a lot of money transacting, right? Who's looking out for us? No one's actually governing what the grading companies are doing. They make their own rules. They break their own rules. They change
there is no formal sense of accountability for them, and so it does create some level of, for sure.
And so that's the idea, the overall idea.
Monetarily, if we stop using one over the other, they'll get the picture. But until that time happens, they have full reign.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you bring that up, because that's so true, and that's something that we talk about often, right? We have to vote with our wallet, and we are in an environment where we don't have an alternative to CGC that competes with CGC's brand, right? Everyone wants to say, well, we only, like pressers will say, we use what our customers tell us to. We press their books, they tell us where to submit them. And why do customers want to submit to CGC? Because CGC gets the most value on the secondary market. We don't have someone that competes with that value. CGC's brand and reputation for sales and their involvement with large books at auction houses and how that sort of translates to what people want to shop for and what people want to sell to people spending big dollars, essentially. It keeps people in that cycle of grading with CGC. Now, the community has to break that cycle, or we need a real competitor, someone with a large enough brand that could come in and really shake stuff up and kind of hold CGC's feet to the fire. And enter PSA. PSA is the only company. Someone starting from scratch has a lot of ground to cover before they could come anywhere near competing. PSA is far from starting from scratch. They're a far bigger institution than CGC is. PSA's parent company is larger than CGC's parent company. They have the capital, they have the manpower, and they have the brand to really come into this market.
And the connections, like you were saying, within.
And the connections. They could play those same games at the auction houses that an up-and-coming grading company cannot play. And obviously, CBCS is not an up-and-coming grading company, and I don't have the answers as to why they aren't playing ball the way a company like theirs should play ball. And that's just a different story altogether. At the very least, when you call a company, your customer service representative should have some idea what item you're talking about. And what I hear about CBCS is their case is great. I know that firsthand, their case is great. And I think the service they provide is just fine. They have the same pitfalls as any other grading company, but I think customer service is really important, right? You hear this about CGC. You hear CGC's cases are not infallible. They have a lot of infallible. I don't know what that word is. They have a lot of issues. Infallible. They have a lot of issues, but their customer service always leaves you kind of feeling good. The representative is not going to fix your book, is not going to receive your book, but they speak to you in a way such that you feel heard. And that's always nice.
They are good on the phone. They're good on the phone.
They're good on the phone, right? Like you'll get that communication. You might not get it with the person that can actually affect change, but at least someone answers the phone call. Sorry, that was super long-winded. I don't know where I started. I don't know where we ended up, but yes.
Yeah, and then so my question is, since you brought up the PSA, did your relationship with PSA, I should say, derive because of the spotlight that was on you in the grading world with CGC, but from breaking all that news, or did your relationship with PSA come from somewhere else?
No, it certainly. Now, see, what I like to say is I don't know what would have happened if certain things didn't happen. All I know is the reality that I exist in, right? Like my goal is obviously to be a voice in this community and to develop relationships that I find interesting. So over time, I may have developed that same relationship. But like I said, things accelerated because of that CGC discovery. So absolutely, my name came on the map for PSA as a result of that. When they started to have conversations with community members that they already knew and had relationships with, my name began to come up. Who should we talk to and get some opinions from, so on and so forth. And I feel really honored that my name came up in those conversations. And then one thing was sort of the tipping point, where about a month after and I might get the timeline a little wrong, but loosely it all makes sense. About a month after the discovery of the CGC thing and that thing just taking off, right? Which I'm super proud of everything that transpired after that. I'm not happy that the event happened or the situation is what it was, but I'm proud of how the community sort of rallied about that, so on and so forth. But in any case, then I made this post one day, and the post said, what if PSA started grading comics?
I remember. So this was what I was getting. I was curious if that post.
Yes.
I couldn't remember when it was, like timeline wise. I'm curious.
About a month after the CGC thing. So in January, sometime I made that post. I had never spoken to PSA prior to that.
Okay.
They saw that post and I don't want to say too much, but that's when the personal connection began. They were already individuals at PSA that were connected with me socially, but we had not spoken. I follow, they follow, I follow, like we followed each other, right? Certain individuals. But after I made that post, then they started communicating with me, and they were like, wait a second.
I was curious if it was like you had already established a relationship.
No.
And they were like, hey, why don't you just float this out there and just see what kind of response you get?
Right.
That's cool. Okay. I like that. You derived that out of your own mind then, essentially. So.
I absolutely love that. And obviously they're friends of mine that were already had a relationship with PSA, but I didn't know to what extent. I didn't know what was happening, and I wasn't part of those conversations. But after that post, I was invited into the conversation, and then I developed that into my relationship with the people that I communicate with at PSA. And I love it. I feel grateful for it. I feel honored for it. And it's going to last for as long as it's going to last, and it's going to become whatever it's going to become. But it's a friendly relationship where it's based on a certain level of trust and a level of respect, of course. And then it leaves me with certain privileges, if you will. And I hope not to abuse that relationship. And I hope they continue to, provide me with information in advance. I think it's very cool to know things and be invited to things, simply.
Yeah, you're on the inner circle. I think I'd enjoy it
Circle of
myself.
trust. The circle of trust.
Yeah.
The circle of trust. Dude, trust is super important, man. And I really appreciate that people that engage with me realize how important that is to me. Yeah, it's very important to me. Like, certain people probably get annoyed, right? Because like I take it so serious that there's certain things I want to say and I check with them before I say things. And I'm not just specifically talking about PSA. I just mean in general. If I have relationships that I care about and there's something that I want to say, but it might paint someone in a bad light, I may give them the heads up, or I might talk to them before, right? And previously I used to say, man, having friends makes it really hard to tell the truth. Because sometimes there's something you want to say, you might have a relationship, but this is something needs to be said. But at the end of the day, I still believe that having friends does make it difficult to tell the truth, but also my perspective has shifted somewhat, where there are individuals that don't mean to do something wrong. And sometimes things happen that need to be discussed that implicate individuals, but it wasn't their fault. So it's open to, it's all right to talk about it, as long as you preface any part of the conversation that brings someone else into it with the fact that, now this person had no idea this was going to happen, and this person just became involved because of X, Y, and Z, but it's not their doing. It's almost like what happened during the CGC thing. How many times a certain consignment page's name was brought up, and they didn't like that, but just so happens they're part of that story in a big way.
Yeah. And, when it comes to talking to you about this, and, you're saying that you're on the inner circle, right? So you're obviously giving feedback to PSA, right? And one thing I would think about a lot is someone to say is like, if you were like, Rohan, or if you asked, the community in general, like, what is feedback do you think CGC, or excuse me, PSA should get? The one thing that comes to the top of my mind is that, in my opinion, the thing that why I think CGC is in the position they're in is not because they've made mistakes. I think any one of us can understand that no one's perfect. No company is perfect. When you're grading thousands of books, there's going to be mistakes. Things are going to happen. It's their response to the mistakes. Maybe not on an individual basis. Like, you get a crack case, they'll replace it. Not talking about that. I'm talking about like when we have these bigger controversies, like Bananagate, let's just say right now. And then they come out and they're like, that bending is within our standard. And it's just like, man, stop. And it's just like, it comes across as like, shut up. Your opinion doesn't matter. We're busting forward. Like, there's just no grace with which they handle the controversy, in my mind.
Yeah.
And if they could handle that with grace, they would receive grace back. You know what I'm saying? Like, if they came out, like, in my opinion, I would think, like, if CGC came out with Bananagate and was like, you know what, we realize that this new machine I'm just making up an example, this new machine that we had just switched to actually was causing this due to the temperature of what we were trying to do here with blah, 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 blah. And it caused this bow. We have recognized it as an issue, and we are working hard to, instead they try to like paper over it and keep moving forward. And that to me is what is infuriating about CGC. And like my feedback would be to PSA is, we get you're starting. And even when you do make a mistake, when you're 20 years in, just don't treat us like redheaded stepchildren when it gets brought up. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can give grace if you treat it gracefully, in my opinion. That's just,
I agree with you completely. And in other words, CGC is incredibly disrespectful. They insult the intelligence of the collectors that completely understand what bending a book means, and they're disrespectful, and they're insulting, and I feel disrespected and insulted by it, and it's like we've given CGC a lot. We've done quite a lot for CGC. I know a lot of people like to frame it like CGC did a lot for the collecting community. It sort of turned expensive books into into things that can trade with ease. with less concern, less worry. But unfortunately, that's an illusion. And if at one point in time that were the case, it isn't anymore, because everything that's been proven by scandal after scandal, scenario after scenario, is that there are things that you have to look for. You can't blindly buy a CGC encapsulated book. Sometimes it isn't the book that was originally encapsulated. Sometimes there's damage created within the case itself. Sometimes CGC damages books after the book has been graded. So just because the number says that doesn't mean it's going to regrade as that anymore. You know, all of these things where you can't just say, oh, it's CGC encapsulated. That's why they exist. So we can trust the process, but you can't trust the process. And as enlightened collectors, as intelligent individuals, as people that care about where they spend their hard-earned money, it's very important to realize that. And it's a tough pill to swallow. You have to wake up and realize, oh shit, we're not actually safe. And now we have to inspect everything as if we're buying raw again. Well, the truth is, yeah, that is what's happened. Not all across the board, but at a high enough rate that it matters enough and we should always be paying attention. And that means things have to get a little rough before they get smooth again. You know, we have to ruffle some feathers. We have to piss some people off. Some dealers are going to have to feel it in their pocketbook and complain enough to CGC to get CGC to make some changes. You know, there's dealers that don't want to say anything about it because they don't want the money to stop. They don't want their clients to start saying, hey, can I get a picture of the side so I can see if it's bent? Hey, is this that? They don't want to hear any of that shit. They want to get paid, package a book, and ship it, you know? But
yeah. So with that in mind, then, as someone that is in the business of selling high grade collectibles, how has it affected your business? How have you adapted, or what are you doing to adapt? Like, talk to me about that.
Well, I've never been a volume shop for one, right? It's even prior to all of this. See, this is one of the coolest things about this. I've always been this same person. It just became more people started paying attention as a result of. But this is always what I've talked about, and this is always how I've treated the business. I'm a private client sort of person, one-on-one conversations. I go over the details prior to when going over the details was fashionable. You know, I've always been that person. So what it has changed is that it's a little more challenging to sell a big item because as a result of all of this discussion in the community, we do have a smarter buyer out there, a more cautious buyer. I've always wanted to speak to a cautious buyer, but now without me having to point out what someone should be aware of, people are bringing it up. And so that adds a couple of other steps in between getting a transaction done, but I might have introduced those steps as it were. So for me, I've certainly noticed that people are more careful when purchasing. They're not all willy-nilly about spending big dollars. The questions they're supposed to be asking, they are asking. And but I am still able to connect with the client for an item that I'm selling, and I'm still able to transact. I still stand behind my product. One of the things that I've always done, because people say, yo, how could you talk all this mess about CGC? Which I'm just phrasing it that way. I don't think I talk mess about CGC. I think I have intelligent discussions about things that need to be addressed. I'm bringing up facts. Yeah. You know, people say, but then you sell CGC products. Yeah, but I don't sell bent books. I don't sell cracked slabs. I sell the books that I take into my collection. I've always been detail oriented. I've always wanted the best examples. I sell 9/8 that look like 9/8. You know, there's collectors out here, they'll get a gift grade and they'll celebrate. That there's nothing to celebrate there, because if you ever sell that book, you're screwing whoever buys it from you. And if you're happy because the little grade says 9.8, it doesn't even fucking apply to the book. The book isn't actually the grade that you're happy about. A gift grade is someone telling you you're an idiot. And you're going to try to make someone else an idiot when you sell it. It is not a fucking good thing. I've never sold gift grades. I've never wanted gift grades. Sorry.
But that happened to Dan, our buddy Dan from X-Men Comics. And what are you supposed to do in that case?
He spoke to me about that. Yeah, no, he handled it. And sorry, not to, I apologize for cutting you off. That I am familiar with. He spoke to me about that. And he said, man, it was well, I don't know if I want to talk about, I won't name the book because I don't remember how much he made public, but I think he went through all of this publicly as well in a post. A substantial book, an expensive book, got the 9/8, didn't look like a 9/8. And he did ask me about it, you know, just wanted my opinion, which I really appreciate because again, I was, you know, in the spotlight for having opinions about these things. And he knows me and we know each other. And he was already of the mindset that he wanted to be transparent about the visual defects on the books and that he wasn't anticipating it to be that great. and he was considering discounting it. Being transparent about it, and if the buyer does want it, even still discounting it so that he can, sleep a little easier at night. And I think that is the right approach, and I do believe that's the approach that he's taken. Oftentimes I'll take in books on trade, and some of them might not live up to what I believe that grade should be. I discount them. I make note of the flaws, and I discount them, and I move them on. I don't want to sell them for the top dollar, because if that person ever cracks that book out and submits it to a signing, the chances of it not retaining that grade are high. And I don't want to have any responsibility in that. And I don't want to try to, convince someone that it is what it's supposed to be. So I think that's the approach that he took. And that's fucked up, because that's what CGC makes people do. CGC shouldn't even have to, you shouldn't have to have an ethical conversation, a moral conversation with yourself about how to receive a grade from CGC or how to transact it. CGC's quality control should be there. CGC should be having a moral conversation with themselves every time they grade a book, encapsulate a book, and ship you something that with the service that you've paid for. So that happens to many people, right? But a lot of people just don't pay attention, and shit just rolls downhill, right? So you have these poorly graded books just floating around because a lot of people are transacting these things as if they don't even matter. You buy a book on Whatnot, you got 30 seconds to make a fucking decision. You can't see shit on the book. You don't know what the hell's going on, right? If that book ships to you and you're not happy, your Whatnot seller's not going to deal with you like some respectable customer service. He's going to say, take it up with Whatnot, and Whatnot's going to refund you. And that's just how that goes, right? And so there's this perpetuation of not paying attention, not taking this shit seriously, and thinking everything is good. Everything is not good. There's a lot of bullshit being sold. And no disrespect to the good Whatnot guys, no disrespect to Whatnot. That's just me sort of like,
Right.
making a point in a dramatic sort of way.
Yeah. I mean, so then in that light, with knowing that, go ahead, JP.
I was going to say, you and I spoke in February of this year regarding a book I sold on one of the co-signers. And my book was that 9.8 ASM 328. Mm-hmm. And I had sold it, and it got shipped. It got returned to me because that one co-signer has that money back guarantee for the buyer. Mm-hmm. And it had a manufacturer tear on the bottom left-hand corner that I didn't see.
Yeah.
And when I took the pictures I uploaded to the co-signer did not take the detail. So Instagram doesn't show the detail as well as like your camera does. So it didn't get shown there. I didn't even notice it myself. So I couldn't even base, again, the 9.8 logo on there wasn't enough, because when the guy or the girl who got the book said, not good enough, this little tear at the bottom, that's supposedly manufacturing tear, I don't want it, and shipped it back. And they took it back, and, I end up put it back up online with a different co-signer, and, we acknowledged it again, but I mean, it's like, what do you do in that regard? Do you have to sell it for less because of that tear, or, what are you supposed to do as the person who's getting the book graded and that's holding it?
Yeah, and that was such a unique situation, because that was a manufacturer's defect and you didn't even notice it, right? So it wasn't a matter of a gift grade. I think that book rightfully deserved that grade. CGC recognized that as a defect that exists on many of those books, but in the example of your particular book, it was a bit larger than it typically is on that book, right? And so to the individual that purchased that book from the first consignment page, their personal preference was to have a better visually representing 9.8, and to their benefit, if you will, that return policy of 100% satisfaction is offered by that consignment page, and they took advantage of it, which, that offering of that guarantee is there, so the buyer is well within their rights to use it. But from your perspective, I can totally understand why it almost feels like you're being told you did something wrong, but you didn't, right? It's not, you didn't try to hide it, you didn't notice it, you didn't try to do anything deceitful there. But ultimately, you did end up having to refund the money and take the book back, because when you're doing business with a consignment page, you're agreeing to their terms. The buyer is taking advantage of the terms, right? And so it just is what it is. But if I'm you and you're not going through a consignment page and you receive this book and you notice, hey, this bindery tear, if you will. I don't remember if it was a bindery tear or a printer grabber tear, those things at the
It
bottom,
was
right?
right
Whatever.
by the newsstand. It was right by the
Right by
newsstand.
the newsstand, yeah. And if you notice this, and it really just depends on, the only thing that you have to do is find the buyer that you want to find. I'll put it that way. You have to find the buyer that you want to find. You either are going to cater to the buyer that wants the perfect book, and perhaps you're going to discount this rightfully graded, but visually less appealing than another example, potentially. Maybe you're going to discount this book to satisfy a buyer that's more detail oriented or more like snobby the way I am. I use that word as a term of endearment, so I don't think anyone should be offended by it. But or you're going to take it upon yourself to find a buyer that doesn't care as much. And that doesn't mean you're lying. There are buyers. I deal with people all the time that I tell them everything wrong with the book, and they're just like, Manu, I don't care. Just send me my fucking book.
I have
enough.
I have one of your books that exactly is that 9.4 ASM 300. You're like, it's off center a little bit, and I was like, I don't care.
I do remember when you purchased an ASM
right over
300
there.
from me. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember. I was like, it doesn't have the greatest wrap or something, and you were
it's
like,
off center.
Send me the fucking book, please.
Yeah, I'm cool with it. And again,
so
it doesn't bother me, but I know some things used to bother me because I have a little bit of OCD, so I can get people having issue. But that's the greater problem with CGC and getting it graded. We were looking at on our Instagram discussion recently in X-Men 1, 1963, and there was a couple copies of it, but they were similar in grade, but one of them was faded, but they had the same grade, right? So one of them's less visually appealing, and you're like,
but that one was I will say though that it was priced based on that though. Like there were 4.0s, and the 4.0s that were nice colors were $7,800, and then the faded one was $7,100. So there was a discount on the fade. So
and so therefore that's what you have to deal with. You got the same number on the book. I don't remember if they were both off white pages or white pages. I'm pretty sure they were both off white.
Mm-hmm.
So now you got to take a $700 decrease. There should be some more involved. Like, I don't want to get too far into grading that much detail, faded cover, tear, like all this kind of stuff.
Listen, JP, I super apologize. I was distracted by some dumb shit, and I missed which book it was. So you just said a $700 deal. Which book was it?
It was X-Men 1. So it was X-Men 1 that was posted on a consignment page. This is so
same page, I think.
It's the same page. He posted he's going to post 4. He's a very good seller, and he posted he's going to post 4 X-Men 1s up for sale. And I'm sure we don't need to name the seller, but I'm sure many people will recognize he's very reputable, very well. I talk with him. He's a great guy. But he posted, he said, I'm about to post 4 X-Men 1s. There was a 5.0 and 3 4.0s, right? So the 5.0s priced at the 5.0 price, and then the 3 4.0s, there's 2 that have bright colors. And then there's a third that is very faded, but it's still a 4.0.
Got it.
So the 2 4.0s that have the good color were like $7,800, and then the one that was faded was like $7,100. So there was a discount applied to it, even though it was still a 4.0, which is, I think, what we're talking about.
So I'll tell you where I stand on that. I mean, having now that I listened, so I apologize that I kind of didn't listen the first time around. I mean, that's the way that I would do it. I won't even say 3. If I had 2 of the same book, and the reds on one are faded to like some sort of pink, that one's going to get discounted by me, because I think
you paid the same, not to interrupt, but you paid the same money that CGC
to grade you're talking about
the same grade, and you say based on whatever value they came up with, you paid that percentage on that book. Both of them paid the same, but you got to take less money because it's faded. So why can't they?
I don't know the details of the grading of that book. And the reason I'll say this is, I mean, you might know that all of them were graded in the same submission, and maybe in fact they all were, charged the same amount at the same time, which makes sense because CGC will upcharge you or charge you based on the value of the book. And their value is going off of, whatever the recorded sale is, not a visual comparison of color, So yeah, I totally understand that. So maybe there's some degree of unfairness when paying for what that book is graded at, but also one of the things to consider is, since I don't know the history of that book, I don't know the cert number, what if that book was not faded when it was graded? And what if
Yeah,
it's
that's what I was
faded
gonna
because
say,
it was
right?
sitting in the sun?
That's what I was gonna say. You could have had it out in like the windowsill,
And maybe if you grade it now, it doesn't get that same grade. Maybe maybe the color's been degraded to that degree. I'm just saying, because I don't know.
Or I mean, or the
that's
other,
the
or
biggest
the
problem with grading. Like that's the biggest problem with grading.
Mhm.
The case doesn't last forever. There's
And
no
it doesn't
UV
protect the
protection.
book.
this is
It
okay.
doesn't-
Okay, this is actually something I do want to
PSA is
talk
going
about.
to have UV protection, 99%.
Well, actually, we
Yeah,
can
there
talk
you go.
about that too in just a sec. So, one thing I do want to talk about, since that comment was just brought up, this is one thing that, again, I am not telling any collector to do what they should, like what I'm
I need
saying.
to make notes. There's heck of stuff I wanted to say. I keep forgetting because we're having such a great conversation. You carry on. I make notes.
So one thing I don't understand is I always hear, and even friends of mine, and I'm not trying to call them out, I'm not trying to say they're wrong, but I don't agree with this take. People say one of the reasons they want to grade a book is for preservation purposes.
Yep, I hear it all the
I
time.
don't think that's a reason to grade a book, because a CGC slab is not preserving your book, in my opinion. And I'll give you a couple examples. One being what we just talked about. They're not UV protected, right? So your comic book can fade. So it's not protected in that light. Second, you take a book, you put it in a bag and board, and you put it in a top loader. Take the same book, put it in a CGC slab. Push both of them off of your desk at work, and I'm honestly going to take my chances with the top loader, because that CGC case is going to crack to all hell. Not saying the top loader won't crack, but the crack is going to be because the plastic used is a more brittle plastic than what your top loader, right? Just because of the, just because of the size of the case, it's going to crack a lot more if you drop it from a height than a top loader would. So I never understand the preservation aspect of people's reasoning to grade. So I just wanted to bring that up, and I'm just curious if you guys thought that.
I want to interject, and I want to add to that. So I agree with you entirely. First, to calling it a method of preservation, to a certain extent, it is. To a certain extent, I'm only saying that to give them that. But the point is, the false sense of security that creates is actually very problematic. Because people assume, since it's encapsulated, they could just ship this shit all over the world. Nothing's going to happen to it. Absolutely wrong. You gave the example of if it falls and it cracks, anything could happen. There's an even more terrifying example, because it goes unnoticed sometimes. Now people are wisening up and they're understanding that this happens and they're looking for it. But if you drop something, or if it catches a nice bump in shipping, which doesn't break the case, and I sound a broken record about this, pun intended, the energy of that impact has to transfer. And so if the case isn't going to break, well, the energy is still going somewhere. That book in the inner well, inside the encapsulation, is going to shift, and it's going to fly into one of those corners. And a lot of those inner wells have those cutouts that give you this false sense of protection for the corner. But what about where the cutout is not a cutout, and it matches and meets that flat edge again? Well, that creates a point. Right? The cutout meeting the flat edge, there's a point. That point, if your book hits it, which there are 8 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on a book, it's going to bend that portion of the book. It's going to catch the page, fold it over. Sometimes it tears it, sometimes it bends it, sometimes it sends a shock wave sort of crinkle through it, depending on where it happens and how it happens. Now, this is something that does not damage the outer encapsulation. So a quick inspection, you think, oh shit, my 9/8's a 9/8, right? It's not until you actually examine the book within the inner well that you say, well, how the hell is this damaged? How is it wedged up into this corner? How is it bent over? That's because the books are not suspended from movement. They're suspended when you're not banging them around, but when you're banging them around, they move around. And so that's a problem as well. And then of course, what climate you store it in. It's not a mechanism. It doesn't protect it against not the word. I don't want to use the harsh word. If you're not experienced with how to store something, it doesn't protect it from the environment. Humidity is still going to catch up to that thing. Light is going to catch up to that thing. All of those things still have to be considered. It's not safe just because it's been encapsulated. You can keep a book safe without encapsulating it, for sure, obviously.
Yeah, and now with that all being said, I do think there's reasons to grade books that are super high value and things like that. Of course. I'm
a big proponent for grading. I want third-party grading to work. I just want it to work the way it's supposed to. I want it to work properly. I don't want it to be a bunch of bullshit and lies that we keep paying for and eating. That's not what this is supposed to be.
The biggest thing from grading, real quick, is just the restoration qualified books. Like that's where the benefit comes.
I agree. I agree with you, JP. You
that's
get
the biggest benefit, in fact.
I agree 100% there. That is a great. It ensures you think you bought what you bought, right? Which is you got to. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. So where I was going to go next, and since you said it, Manu, you said PSA UV protectant to 99%. Now, I am not a material scientist, but from my understanding, all of this plastic that is used in slabbing of comics and cards, et cetera, is UV protected to quite a high level. But to get like that legit full UV protection, I believe there needs to be an actual step where they add some kind of coating to this plastic. With that in mind, I think a lot of companies will say their slab is UV protected because the plastic in general is UV protected to some degree. So my question is, does PSA, are they actually going to use that coating on the because, for example, PSA card slabs are not UV protectant.
I think the new ones actually are, and there was a brand new design that is UV reflective. The design was actually recalled, and they're rejigging it because it's a brilliant slab. I actually have one here, and I'll show you in detail what I'm talking about. But the interesting thing is, this is their new slab. This is their older slab. Now, from this distance, you can't tell the difference, but this is a heavier slab. There are certain style differences when you get close to it. But an interesting thing happened, this little micro crack right here. There's plenty of videos about this. Almost every single card slabbed in this for the few months that this slab was available ended up having this small defect. And enough people complained about it. And you know what PSA did? They didn't tell you to shove it. You know, they didn't tell you, oh, that's normal. Well, actually,
they didn't tell you it's within acceptable standards.
At the very beginning, when a few people did, they were like, what? Okay, is it really bothering you guys? Because it's kind of on all of them. And then everyone was like, yes, it's bothering us. They recalled the slab. So this new slab, which is beautiful and UV reflective, is a fantastic piece of work. I love it. But now we're slabbing in the original slab again until they re-engineer this to not have that micro hairline crack looking. It's not a crack, it's something. But until they design this to get rid of that, then they'll come back to this. But that's how seriously they took it. But this one, apparently, if I remember all the updates correctly, is UV reflective. And I'll look into that again. Actually, I'm pretty certain it is. And the interesting thing is, so you asked me, like, what are they incorporating into their plastics? I don't know about the engineering side, and I'm sure it's proprietary. I'm sure they're not going to divulge to me exactly what the technology or what the mixture of that plastic is to make it what it is. But I will say this. They very specifically use the word UV reflective. And maybe that's industry terminology. They say it's UV reflective up to 99%. Now, I don't know what exact degree of protection that gives you. I would still say to any collector, if you want to make sure your stuff is safe, keep it out of sunlight. Like, don't put it UV like, reflective or not.
Like a condom?
Well,
just don't. Wait, what does the condom have to do with sunlight?
Well, because
condom is 99% effective, but so you can there's still a chance to have a kid. So
exactly,
don't have sex.
There's still a chance that your red is going to become orange. Red is the first to fade. Anyway, but so for whatever that means, I don't think you should just start lining your living room wall with these things and letting the morning light come through every day. I just don't think that's a good idea regardless.
Yeah, that being said, though, I do think that UV protection is something that should just be standard, in my opinion, on a comic slab. In my opinion, it should be.
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree with you.
Think about it. If you're at a comic store and they have all their slabs up, most likely they have windows. And it's getting in. Where I have my slabs at, there's no windows in that particular room. There's not going to be any issues with sunlight. So I got this Dave Stevens art print framed, and they said, do you want to have UV protection? I'm like, no, because it's going to be in a basement, and there's not going to be any sunlight hitting it. So I didn't pay for that.
Right.
But if you're going to have your book exposed or your art exposed, then you better have UV protection, like Rohan said. But I think you should have the choice, depending on where you're going to put it.
I agree with you completely. And the thing about a comic book store is, if things are going right, they're supposed to be churning through inventory.
Yeah,
right?
moving it out
exactly.
quick enough.
It's not their permanent display, because I go to comic book stores all the time. They still got standees that they've had since the late 90s, right? Or a poster that's been up in a corner for a while. That thing has no color left in it. You know, if something stays for long enough, it's obviously going to get affected by the light. But for their wall books and stuff, hopefully they're rotating them enough to keep them from getting damaged by the light. I want to take this back one step really quickly to back to that idea of that X-Men example of, you know, one of the books being $700 less than the other one. Now, let's say they priced them the same. A buyer is still going to apply a different value to them, whether they're priced the same or not. If you've got two books, they're $7,500, you're the buyer, and one doesn't look as good as the other, and I don't care if it's for color, I don't care if it's because of cover wrap, or, you know, Rohan, we'll have this conversation, cut and wrap.
Yeah, that's
Very
right.
important to differentiate, right?
Yeah.
Rohan really expanded my not only vocabulary but perspective on something in a beautifully accurate way. So we'll talk about that. But as a buyer, you're already going to decide which one looks better to you. And let's say that one gets sold first, or they're both still available, and for some reason the seller is trying to get you to buy the one, you know, whatever the scenario might be, you would be inclined to negotiate a lesser price for the one that doesn't look as good. Let's say, for instance, you don't care that one doesn't look as good, you'll still take it. You'd still be smart in your negotiation to say, hey, I'll take the one with shittier color if you give me a discount because it doesn't look as good.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, in that same example, if you kind of go the opposite way, like, you know, for some of the books that I chase, right, I can only afford like grades in the 1.0, 1.5 range, right? There are 1.5s that look way better than a lot of other 1.5s, right?
Right.
Some of the 1.5s I have, I think, present very well compared to other 1.5s I've seen. In that same night, I would pay slightly above market rate for the well-presenting 1.5 versus a less presenting market rate 1.5.
Of course, man. And that's using an example of a 1.5. And you're absolutely right. There's some 1.5s that present beautifully and some that, you know, they don't. It depends on where the bulk of the damage is and so on and so forth, right? But even when you get into like I just lost my train of thought. I'm just going to agree with you.
Well, that's the biggest problem, is that you're not buying a product, right? It's not like you go buy a box of cereal. Again, these are $1,000 books. Every box looks the same. You have to, like, the ones you're looking for, that has to be, you know, 9/8, Newsstand, Mark Jewelers, Full Todd signature, like all these things that go into this particular comic that you want to find to make it the perfect item. Rohan's in the same way. It got to present well, and it's a 1.5, but I'll pay more, but it has a tear, and like it you know, it's just part of the hunt. You know, it's like you're hunting.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's like, exactly.
I've been saying this recently more than not, because obviously there's a subgrade conversation happening in the grading community as it pertains to a certain lawsuit that is currently active, or whatever the word is. But we, you know, even though people don't downgrade a book, the grading companies don't downgrade a book because of the cover wrap or the cut. We as individuals, depending on what sort of individuals we are, I'll speak for myself, I'm grading that anyway. You know, when I'm looking at that book, they could both be the same grade identified by the grading company. I am still giving a higher grade preference-wise, mentally, to the book that presents better, that I would be
you're
more proud of owning.
You're applying a premium of some factor.
Of some factor, you know, and maybe that premium is just the difference between me buying it or not buying it. You know, like, fuck a discount. Maybe I just pass on it altogether if it isn't the one I want. So the grade didn't do shit for convincing me. It didn't pass my eye appeal test, right? We are making these decisions whether a grading company identifies or downgrades because of it or not. You know, I don't know who, you know, pressured companies into putting page color up there. Maybe it was always up there. I don't remember. I've never actually studied like a first gen CGC slab, but you know, maybe there was a point in time where page color wasn't notated and it was left up to the customer to decide. But I assume when you were buying, I'm sort of just thinking out loud here, so forgive me. But I guess prior to third-party grading, when dealers would represent a raw book, maybe that was something they always identified, like, oh, yo, these pages have turned brown on the inside of this, so we have to put a different value on this book versus the one that has bone white pages. That is a notable difference. It speaks to the environment and how this book was stored and cared for, so it's worth noting. So maybe that was always around, but regardless of what companies grade down for, we as individuals, certain collectors, are making those differentiations anyway.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I do it myself, as noted. So
Yeah,
yeah,
you know, but yeah. So just to put a little bow on this really quickly, slabs are great. I love slabs. One of my reasons for loving slabs, you know, JP said the real value proposition of a grading company is to help a inexperienced consumer buy with some degree of confidence something that may or may not have otherwise been restored, staple added, missing this, you know, detached that. Things that we love books, we want them. We're not experts. We don't feel like taking a dealer's word for it. We want this authority to come in and let us know, right? And when this thing works correctly, this world, this economy of third-party grading, that's what it's supposed to do. That's how it's supposed to serve us. And I think that's a hugely valuable service. But it has become so much more than that. It's become just something that collectors like to participate in. This interaction with third-party grading. People grade shit that has no reason to be fucking graded, right? When you have a book that someone releases, it's limited to 300, and then all 300 go to CGC, and 298 of them are 9.8s. There's no reason for it to be a 9.8 because your 9.8 is not cooler than, rarer than, or any different from the other ones. They could have just been 300 in a top loader, you know, for all intents and purposes. It doesn't show you that one is of a higher condition than another because they all are. So that was unnecessary encapsulation to, you know, a certain example of, from my perspective, right? And so, but it's become this thing where it's much more than the essential service of grading. And the grading companies have become complacent because of that, because it's a service that people just enjoy. They want to encapsulate everything, so that it's made them lazy. They're going to get all their money anyway because people just keep encapsulating shit that came out a week ago.
yeah.
What are you grading that for?
They can't just tell for what they
You know what?
think is
Something
great.
I didn't think about in that light is like, you're a dealer right now. I know the majority of the books you deal with are not necessarily ones that color touch is something that you have to.
I've dealt with it though.
Yes, I know you have. I know you've dealt with it like on the Maximum Carnage, I think you said
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
My point being, like, imagine if you were a Silver Age, you know, where you deal with a lot with Silver Age books, right? X-Men 1s and Jim 83s. If there wasn't that grading company, think about how much time of your day would be taking in. You just took in this new collection that you've inventoried, and you now have to spend hours to check if it has restoration on all this entire collection because it's a Silver Age collection, where
Right.
if that same collection was graded as a dealer, you don't have to do that. You know, obviously you want to check some things, I'm sure, right? But like, you don't have to, it definitely cuts down on your time.
Oh, 100%. No, I mean, the reason it exists is for the right reason. You know, it lost its way along the way. It became a hugely profitable business, and it became, quite frankly, just about the money. You know, you have investors that have gotten involved. CGC is no longer the CGC that it was 20 years ago. You know, a lot of the people that originally helped establish it, they've left. Steve Borock left a long time ago. You know, and he's largely spoken about to be one of the guys that had real integrity, and that's why he couldn't deal with the day-to-day of what even early on started to happen within the walls of that original grading company. So he jumped ship to start CBCS, where he wanted to do things the way that ethically he felt they should. And then money got involved, and that went bad too. His partner had to sell that business to Beckett. right? And it's a business at the end of the day. So there's two ways to look at this. The collector looks at grading the ideal way for what we want it to be. And then the investors, the people that have put money into these businesses, give a fuck less. Couldn't give a fuck less. They are about the bottom line. What are you doing to bring in more dollars? Where's the next signature series event? Where's the next gimmicky encapsulation of some bullshit that everyone's going to buy?
Agreed, right? And I do think, right, we'll actually get to the competition part of it in a sec, but I think that is something CGC is grappling with now, in the sense of why are you seeing more signature series events, right? Because it's an opportunity to someone to resubmit a book they've already graded, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, we could talk all we want, like CGC could talk all they want about, like, oh, we're doing 9.9s. I am willing to bet that there was some planning involved where with the 9.9s, where they're like, hey, if we hold to a 9.8 and then down the line, because the thing is, as time progresses, there are less and less books available to grade. So their supply of coming in of books to grade, theoretically, there's an endpoint to that, right? Obviously, they're still making new books and things like that, but that number is shrinking. So CGC has to develop methods for people to take books that are already graded and resubmit them to be regraded, right? And you have signature series. That's why you see the acquisition of JSA, because now you can take books that say Stan Lee written on cover, and now they will say authenticated by, JSA on your side, right? Now you can resubmit all these 9.8s and potentially get a 9.9. And right. And like, here's the thing. Don't be surprised if in 15 years, after 9.9s are a regular, let's just say if they are, now all of a sudden they're like 10.0s. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's another reason to resubmit your book to them and keep their supply going. Like, and there are going to be other ideas they come up with to get people to be like, oh, I should send it. Custom labels is another example. I've got
custom labels, of course.
Right. I've got this great slab already. Oh, you want to make it look cool? If it had this Thor label on it now, let me resubmit it.
And this is the exact point. See, now I can't fault a business for businessing.
No, exactly. I don't fault them at all. I totally get it.
But the reason you exist gets lost in that. And the people that actually rely on that service to be a service of integrity get fucked. Meaning, I mean, there's countless examples, but what you just brought up, the custom labels, right? So what did they do? They set up a custom label service. People resubmit their books to reholder them with the custom label. Oh, we don't have to grade these. We don't even have to look at these. Just send them to that guy over there, that guy or gal that slaps a custom label, and get our $45 from the customer and get this fucking thing moved on, right?
And we found a loophole.
And guess what happened with that? Someone took complete advantage of the fact that over there at CGC, they only give a fuck about the money, not the integrity of the service anymore. So let's just keep sending them books that have been swapped out, because we're going to send them to the reholder, the custom label department, where they don't even look at fucking books. They're just looking at your label to get their little $50, whatever the service costs, and let's get these things gone. So focusing just on the bottom line completely screwed up the integrity of that service. And who gets fucked? The collector. At the end of the day, the collector gets fucked, and there's no other way to look at it.
Yeah, and the thing is that CGC had a leash to lapse in integrity because there was no viable competitor.
Exactly. So bring on the fucking competition.
Yeah, please. And that's aside. If you don't like the PSA slab, blah, 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 it does not matter.
Exactly.
It does not matter. If you're a fan of CGC, you should be cheerleading the hell out of PSA coming on board, because
it makes CGC better.
CGC better, right? It's the same thing.
Yes.
It's the same thing, in my opinion, with like anything, right? And we'll use another example parallel to this hobby. The MCU of the last few years, a lot of people would say it's gone downhill since Endgame. Now, I know you're not a big MCU guy, right?
Sure.
But that's okay. But you've heard people talk about like, oh, the movies aren't as good as they used to.
I have.
Right?
I have heard, yeah.
Those movies have essentially been running unrivaled in the superhero genre, we'll say. Now, DC, because DC's been just putting out shit, right? The movies have sucked. Now they've hired James.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. Okay. No. Now they've hired James Gunn, and he's done some good movies. The hope is he makes quality DC films, and now DC can kind of come firing back into that competition. And it's only going to make, if they're successful with that, it's only going to make them both better, right? Iron sharpens iron, right?
Yep.
You can't lapse and take a break if there's someone hot on your heels. You always have to be pushing forward, and you can only be doing that if you're being consistently challenged by someone else.
I have nothing to add to that. Fuck yes, man.
That's true.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely
to go back, CBCS had the opportunity on numerous occasions to step up their game, and they fell flat until they redid the
label.
And that wasn't well received. I like them, but my biggest complaint with them is that you can't ever tell if it's restored because they retain the blue label, and you have to read the notes.
The one thing I will say though, the thing is it was always going to be hard for CBCS, right? Because CGC had already existed for a long time before CBCS came into the picture. So all those things that Manu mentioned at the top of the hour when we were talking about the connections into the community, the connections in the auction houses, the money, all the establishment, CBCS had a big game of catch up to play, and they have not caught up, obviously, right? The good thing about, again, why PSA coming in is a good thing is because they get a big giant head start in the sense that they got the money, they've got the backing, they've got the connections, they've got the footprint, right? So they're going to be the potential for them to be a legit competitor to CGC is higher. Now, obviously, when they start day one, they're not going to be competitive. They're not going to be equal to CGC, right?
Of course not.
They're going to need to, make their A game and keep going and be consistent. And it's going to take a little bit of time, but it's not going to take as long as a time as a company that was starting from scratch.
100%. You're absolutely right. CGC is probably a little annoyed at CBCS right now for them, making some of the Banana Gate
as far
material.
as CBCS is concerned in that regard, they should be doing even more. They should be hammering that. It.
They should have been hammering them for a year, 2 years on this
Exactly. At this point, they should be
hammering market share slowly. I mean, they're big companies.
Hammering everything every single day, 100%.
Very right. Very right. And so I say that just to say, CGC might be annoyed by CBCS, but I don't assume that they're scared.
No.
PSA can scare CGC. PSA also, they won't say this, and individuals there haven't communicated this to me. This is just something I choose to amuse myself believing, is PSA probably has a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, because CGC decided to take a bit of a bite out of card grading. And so PSA is like, all right, you wanted to come for ours. We're going to come for those comic books, and we've got the money to come for those comic books.
Well, yeah, and then not to mention, there's ego involved at these companies.
Oh, yes,
there's absolutely, right? They're going to want to come in. They're going to want to make waves. They're going to want to take the top spot. So, yeah, absolutely. I'm all for it. And again, this is a scenario where in all those situations we talked about earlier where the grading companies failed us, we were the ones that paid the penalty. In this situation, we reap the benefits of competition.
Yep, and they are got to fight each other. They got to spit on each other, slap each other, whatever. Get as nasty as they want. It doesn't fucking matter. At the end of the day, we just want the environment of third-party grading to give us some good options.
Yep, and to level up.
That's it. And I love, and I completely agree with you. Even if you never want to, have a PSA encapsulated book, even if you're a CGC diehard and that's all you want, you should still, just like you said, you should still be rooting for PSA to do well, because that puts the pressure on CGC to give you an offering that earns your business over the alternative. It makes them earn your fucking business. And they don't need to earn shit anymore because they're the only show in town.
And even to that point, you said, even if you're someone that, when we were at Terrificon a month ago in Connecticut, and the dealer there that had, I'm a big Silver Age guy, right? So my opinion is biased here, but the guy there that had the best inventory of any dealer there, in my opinion, he only dealt with raw books. I mean, he had AF-15 raw, he had Hulk 1 raw, he had ASM 1 raw, all the grails you can think of in the Marvel Silver Age, he had raw. And you can say, oh, it doesn't matter to him. I would disagree, right? Because he is still applying a price to his raw comics based on the condition of that book, right?
Oh, yeah.
That price is correlated to what you get for the graded copy of that book, right?
Yeah.
And if the competition causes the companies to level up, what you get for a 2.0, the value is only going to increase, right? The more integrity those companies have, the more confidence we have in those companies.
Yep.
That then helps also the raw collector and the raw dealer to say like, hey, 2.0s are going for this. I understand mine's raw, so that's why you have this price. But it still affects it all. It affects all of us in the hobby.
I love that you point that out because that's so true. I mean, yes, the raw equivalent is should and would. Well, I won't use the word should, but typically does. And for reasons that make sense to me, will sell for less than the encapsulated of the same grade. Because the encapsulated, you look at that as, well, it's made it to its destination, right?
Mhm.
You thought it was a 2.5, it got graded, now it's encapsulated as a 2.5. I was right, you're buying a 2.5.
And
right?
I invested in getting that 2.5, right?
Oh yeah, and there was money and time put into that. Good point. Versus the book that I just tell you is a 2.5. Well, that comes with a degree of uncertainty, and that uncertainty should come with a discount on that
Mhm.
asking price, right? Because you now the buyer of the book, if you choose to submit it, you've inherited the risk. Because if
Mhm.
it doesn't come back at 2.5, you can't hold me to the 2.5. I told you that I think it's a 2.5, but who knows what the fuck CGC is going to say. It's on you now. And if you want to buy the graded 2.5, well, then I got to submit it and turn it into the graded. So, but the value on the graded market certainly affects and determines values on the raw market. They move together.
Mhm.
And that was an interesting conversation that Swag was having, and a couple of other our friends on YouTube, like the Sports Card Dad, but his collectibles channel is called maybe the Collectibles Dad. I assume it's called. Shout out to him. And he and Swag had a bit of a public argument about this, right? Because I forget the finer points of it, but basically they were saying as Swag was saying, as more of these raw books, I should speak for myself because I don't want to forget what they were saying, but as more of these raw books that exist become graded, it's going to overall start to affect the market. Actually, you know what? Since I'm speaking on something they said, I don't want to. So forget any of that. You make a great point. The graded stuff obviously affects the raw stuff. There was a good point that I remember, and I had it down to 2 sentences, but I have forgotten it now. But the idea was, oh, I remember what it was. For people to say that, actually, fuck all this. Carrying on.
Well, I think you make the point that the more it gets graded, then the census changes, and now it's not as there's more of that book graded now.
Yeah,
They're getting at that point. So the graded can affect the raw, but as the more raws become graded, that affects the graded by dropping the price.
Yeah, and Swag was saying, but the raws sell for what raws sell for. Just because more of them get graded, raws still come in at they still command the respect of the condition of the raw book. But then in my mind, it was also, well, but as more get graded, like you're saying, JP, that brings the graded values down, and graded values are used to determine how you're going to price your raw book, right? Because all of the price recording services are reporting only on graded books. And so if you think your book's a 7.0, you're not going to ask your buddy how much is a 7.0. You're going to go to GPA and see how much a 7.0 graded is selling for, and that's how you're going to effectively price your raw book. So if adding books to the census devalues that book, well, that does involuntarily, but actually, very closely related, affects the raw prices. And I thank you for helping me get there, JP. That is what I was trying to articulate. I just forgot it in the context of the conversation that was happening with Swag and friends on YouTube. That's all that was. But yeah, it all affects each other.
But then you have the other aspect of the graded book there's a value in the ones that you're looking for, right? And those little details we talked about, Newsstand, 9.8, things of that nature. Take away the grade, right? So now, how does the book becomes more valuable or rare because of the census count on CGC or on GPA, but take away the grade, you're going strictly by the amount of books that were printed and how many you think might be around, right?
You could take away the grade, but that doesn't mean you're taking away condition. Condition is still a reality of an item. A grade is, given by a third-party grading company. So condition rarity and grade rarity are two different things, but they kind of can exist without one another. But carry on. Sorry, I'm going to pick up.
But that's kind of what I meant, is that you're holding up a 9.8 ASM 316 and take away the 9.8. Your opinion, my opinion on that grade may be very similar, but if you're coming to the point of I want to buy yours and you're telling me it's a 9.8, again, I trust you on that matter. But let's say I don't even know you, so I'm going to take a different avenue and say, well, I think it's more of a 9.6, so I can get that lower grade or lower cost. But in order I have to get it graded in order for it to be what's supposed to be down pat. This is what it is. No negotiation. It's a 9.8. Done. Now you can negotiate appropriately. But we'll take away the grade, right? You can't negotiate exactly 100% because there's still that you said that that
uncertainty. There's a risk you might not get that grade that you thought it could get. It could be handled incorrectly. It could get anything could happen, right? Until it gets encapsulated. So therefore, and then even after it gets encapsulated, but
still could be. But then so that takes that away from it. But then put it in the grade, and again, the grade has the count, the GPA count, but the more you get grade, that affects it, right? So there's all these factors that go into these books that just make it so hard to know for sure what you're getting, because I just saw a post that somebody found a storage unit full of baseball cards. They found Mickey Mantle rookies, Joe DiMaggio. So all those Mickey Mantles from whatever year it was, 1951. Now there's more of them. So now they're not as rare, right? But someone who, if he was smart, would only put out one at a time as opposed to flooding the market. You find there's a Spawn book that came out a couple years ago that it had the movie cover of it, and then somebody said they found a stack of them.
There was supposed to only be 50. There's a story, and now there's hundreds.
Yeah. So the shit like that happened. So that rarity of the piece being only a 9.8 CGC is only as good until another 9.8 comes up, right? There's that value in that grade versus raw about it being rare because of the grade. Now you could look at a couple and say there's only so many nice ones, but you can't give me a number until CGC puts that number on that census.
And
you know what I mean?
This is no, I love it. And I love that you bring it up, because a lot of people do play strictly the census game, right? They look at it as if the book doesn't exist until it's on a census,
Right.
That's something that kind of cracks me up all the time when people, there are only this many others. It's well, that's how many are on the census. You really have not to mention the census numbers aren't necessarily accurate, right? Because some people, when they crack and press a book, will resend in the label so it does update. A lot of people I know don't. I know a lot of people that keep the label. That way they can have on Instagram, have a post that shows the old label.
I have 40 labels right there.
Exactly.
I've been meaning to send them in,
Exactly.
And some of them are for extremely rare books, like Malibu Sun 13 Errors, where the census absolutely fucking makes a difference. But no, I love that you bring that up, JP. I want to touch on a couple of the things that you said. So they're definitely, see, this is one of the things that third-party grading introduced to the environment of collecting that didn't exist before. And part of that is, and this has to do with PSA and CGC, is census and set registries. People competing to say they have the highest grade in a book. Well, my raw book, I can't say I own it. It has to go, I have the highest grade. It has to go to a company that controls and organizes a census or a registry. It has to be, said by them to be that grade and illustrated in that collection of data for it to be something that, can't be disputed, right? But that only takes into consideration what's gone into that registry through that company. It doesn't take into consideration ungraded, of course, or people that haven't bothered to be part of a set registry. Now, you can't opt out of the census. If CGC grades a book, theoretically, it's supposed to be on the census. Now, could there potentially be books out there that didn't make it onto the census? Yeah, there's glitches in systems. I haven't come across that yet. But it is interesting, the notion of how much significance people put on the census. But most things worth grading have been graded, you know, and that goes to the idea of having to reinvent ways to earn money, because a lot of the things that should have been graded have already. But people do still discover things every day, and some of them are.
I was gonna say, I don't necessarily agree with that take that most things that should be graded have been graded. I am of the belief that over this next 5 to 10 years, and this is not to sound morbid, right? But we're in a period now where a lot of that baby boomer generation is starting to pass away and will continue to pass away for the next 5, 10 years plus, right? I am of the opinion that like it's very possible these like the Fantastic collection, for example, right? Darren's father collected whatever 300,000 books. He didn't grade a single one.
Right.
Only Darren has graded them since his father has passed, right? Now, obviously, that's a very massive collection and things. But I do think that as these next few years unravel, there's going to be more of these collections that come forward that have all just been kept raw because it's an old school guy or gal that has been collecting since 1952, 1963, whatever the case, and didn't care to grade because the collection was for them. But now they've passed on and their children, they're not into comic books or whatever it may be. They need some money. They bring these forward, you know, sell them to an auction. Like, I think, like, you know, for example, like AF-15, there are two 9.6s, right? There is no 9.8. I don't think that that's forever. You know, that's, there could be a 9.8 one day, right? From one of these collection sales, say, potentially. And I even asked Vince, who's the president of Comic Connect, on this show when he was here, you know, almost over 2 years ago. And he's like, you're absolutely like, that very well is a scenario that could be possible, right? Something comes up, like, for example, right? The Mile High Pedigree collection, right? That was a collection that was found raw and kept in immaculate condition, right? And it came about because the kids of the collector inherited the books and they're like, we don't want these. They almost were going to throw them out. And Chuck Rosansky came across them and it was like, I'll take these off your hands, right? Same thing with, again, going back to Darren, he talked about his dad had how many, I can't remember the exact numbers, but he had giant size X-Men 1. And I want to say he submitted 12 of them.
Yeah,
right?
he got like 898s or something.
898s or something like that, right? That's what I'm saying. Like, I am of the belief that you're going to see some collections come out over the next, you know, let's say decade that can really change the market.
Yeah, allow me to take back what I said. The idea of everything that should have been graded has been graded. I was trying to give some credence to the census and give it some significance, but you're absolutely right. That's a foolish thing for me to have said. And that unfortunately makes it even less powerful, the idea of basing scarcity, rarity solely off of census or registries, right? But no, I totally agree with you. And those are great examples. Darren's father's collection, of course, wasn't graded until recently, and it's getting graded. You know, many censuses were disrupted by the introduction of the books from that collection, right?
Yeah.
Including the super rare stuff. We're talking the first Batman, you know, Superman 1, all of these books that the holders of those books do not want to see more come to the census.
Yeah.
But a collection like that happens, and
I mean, take the Superman 1 in Darren's collection now is a 7.5. Prior to that collection, there was only, I believe, one 7.5. He now has the second one.
And I'll tell you, man, if you're the guy that had that other one, you did not celebrate the introduction of a second one.
Exactly. It's why I say Hulk 181, for example. There is one 9.9 on the census, and it's an old label, like one of the original labels, right? Yeah. If I am that owner of that book, you better believe not that I don't want a Hulk. I would put that thing up for auction right now, because the last thing you need in today's climate with where things are getting graded is for a second 9.9 to come onto the census and bust your book's value in half.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So you
I
sell
feel
it now,
bad,
and then
yeah.
you could rebuy. You're a Wolverine fan. By all means, buy a 9.8. I mean, you're going to sell that 9.9 for quite a bit. You can afford a 9.8. Like, that's what I would do. But I mean, to each their own. But
Yeah,
exactly
there's a
right.
lot. No, yeah, totally agree. There are certain 9.9s out there that the best advice for anyone would have been and sort of still is, if you're holding one of those 9.9s that have a few, but they're not in the double digits, and one or two have started to make it onto that census where your 4 is now challenged by a 5th and a 6th, get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if that's a $40,000 book, your days are numbered.
Mm-hmm.
Once that hits 10, that's a 20 or 15,000. I'm making numbers up, but effectively the point is that value was in the scarcity. And if
Mm-hmm.
that scarcity is changing, get out of the fucking book.
Yeah, and I say that about Hulk 181 specifically because we see collections that, like, for example, Golden Age Guru had a video like 2 years ago that was like, I have 50 Hulk 181s, and now they weren't high grade ones, but he submitted all 50 of them, right? So Hulk 181 is definitely a book where there absolutely could be someone that's holding on to 30 copies that are high grade and is now like, oh, maybe now's a good time to grade. And one of those pops into a 9.9, your $1 million book is now $500,000, let's just say.
Hulk 181 has never been rare. Sean from Reserve Investments have said it, and I echo that sentiment, and I made a reel out of it. It's desirable. It's not rare.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
There's a fuck ton of them in every grade, including the high grades.
Yeah, I mean, there's like 100 and something 9.8s.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. And what Reserved Investment was talking about, and I echoed, was Giant Size X-Men 1. But I look at it the same way.
Yeah, it's that same age book. Yeah,
it's the same. They're not rare. They're desirable. They're always fucking available. There's not going to be a day where you're like, oh shit, I'm never going to be able to get one again. No, it's just you'll always be able to get one.
Yeah.
But anyway, I digress. Yeah, I agree with you. The 9.9s have been challenged by this thing happening. Oh, and that brings us back to this other point. When you were saying earlier, you were like, when they get done with the 9.9s, they might say 10s. And yes, maybe this was, maybe this was a long con, right? Where they're like, we're going to give 9.8s, exhaust 9.8s, and then we're going to cook up this idea for 9.9s. But, and there could have been a little bit of that. There's definitely census control, pop control. There are definitely books that intentionally are not granted 9.9s, and then somebody calls on for a favor and gets a favor granted, gets special attention. Instead of going to grader's row, it just goes directly to the head grader's desk. I'm gonna just stop saying people's names as loosely as I used to before, right? And it just goes to the head grader's desk, and the person that called is a friend of the head grader, and it gets the attention that it deserves. And it's like, yeah, you know what? This passes as a 9.9. Give them the fucking 9.9. Those kinds of things absolutely happen. But one of the things that wasn't an eye-opener to me, I suspected as much, but I had never heard a professional from the environment of grading say it. And the individual that said it was Mark Wilson. Mark Wilson, from CBCS as a finalizer was his position there. And he was recruited here by PSA to be the head grader for the new comic book division. And of course, there's a circumstance at the moment that individuals are working through. But he said something that caught my attention. He said it in an interview. And he said there's professional grading. And then I forgot what he phrased the other one. I call it, so this is my own words, I'm just going to say casual grading, meaning the collector that's grading their book, that's not doing thousands a day, is looking at, and these are my words now, I'm going to reflect on what he said in a moment. We get to spend our time with a book, look over a book, really decide what we think that book is, give it the book in our mind and heart that we think it deserves, right? We don't have 150 books behind us. We don't have a shift ending in 3 hours. We're not thinking about lunch. We're not trying to get the promotion. We don't have a boss breathing down our neck. None of that shit. We're just grading our fucking books, casual collectors, right? But then you'd go into the professional grading environment. Now, this is where Mark Wilson shed some light on an idea, and I think it's very worthwhile to discuss. You have during the pandemic, we'll use as an example, an influx of books being sent in, right? There wasn't enough manpower to grade these books. You can't hire fast enough. You certainly can't train fast enough. And the pressure to get these books shipped out is mounting. It's more than it's ever been before. Turnaround times are 6 months, 1 year, 13 months, and the stacks are getting bigger. So every grader is having to fight with a backlog of books behind every book that they're grading. They only have seconds, to grade these books. And when you wanted to give a book a 9.9, you were supposed to send it up the chain of command and get approval for it, get that second look, get that third look. But in the world of professional grading, when the pressure is on, it's safe to give a book a 9.8 and send it on its way, because the consumer never complains about a 9.8. The consumer never anticipates a 9.9 because it's a unicorn and it's celebrated as such historically it has been. And 9.8s satisfy a collector. They look at 9.8s as close to perfect anyway. So even if that book was supposed to be a 9.9, we need to get it out the door. We don't have time to waste, and a 9.8 is safe. No one's going to complain. And that's how all of those fucking books during the pandemic got 9.8s when many of them should have gotten 9.9s. Ultimate Fallout 4.
Yeah, and so that's also, though, in my vein of that business decision was made there. There also could have been insight into that business decision that said, also in making this decision, when the tide of books slows down, that will be the time that we can reintroduce the 9.9 and get an influx back in, right? There are other ways to deal with that same problem. For example, PSA also was flooded with cards. PSA raised the price of a card grading fee to then slow down the amount of cards that came in. Because now,
first they shut down entirely, and I actually really love that move. They shut down entirely, and then they only opened up the 2 very expensive service.
Yeah, right. Because now you're not going to grade that $5 card, that $10 card when it costs $50, $70, whatever it is. So but I did, like I said, again, I have no factual evidence here, but I'm always of the opinion that when it comes to business and making money, there's always more to the decision made than you on the outside will ever be aware of. And so me putting on my tinfoil hat does say, like, yes, in the pandemic, they're like, okay, how do we speed up time? We don't do 9.9s, but then that also then allows us the opportunity in 5 years, whatever it may be,
and listen,
reintroduce 9.9s.
Dumb luck, though. Could have just been dumb luck, like Manu said.
100%, absolutely. I'm just saying
they just were overwhelmed and went the safe route. But
I like the idea that there's probably more than one thing affecting decisions, right? And yes, we might not ever be. Why would we be? We won't be fully privy to the conversations that determine the decisions made by these businesses. But that doesn't mean that we should just be accepting of whatever the fuck they shovel. It's still our responsibility to question something, to think about something, to voice our displeasure if there is one.
100%.
We pay for a service. We demand that service. They're not our friends. We're not partners in this. They work for us. It's very simple. And if they don't do their job, we fire them. But we forgot the ability to fire them because we don't have anyone else to fucking hire if we get rid of them.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I did really quickly want to talk about, because this point left me a while ago, about why I grade. I'm not in vintage books. Vintage to me is different from vintage to other people. I'm not in golden age books. I'm not necessarily worried about restoration very frequently. It's a small percentage of a thought that crosses my mind. I grade because this environment, when I re-entered collecting, several years ago now, like 4 years ago, was many, many years after I had originally become a collector, of course. I originally became a collector, and you could even say the late 80s if you want. I was young, late 80s, early 90s. But this third-party grading thing was already, in full motion, full steam ahead. I came in and I was like, what the hell? Plastic encapsulated this, that. So I jumped into this environment, this ecosystem that already existed. And I recognized right away that there's premiums applied to the books that are recognized to be a certain grade by this third-party company. So I'm playing ball. I'm jumping into an environment that works. That already, is happening. And so I jump in, and I'm not I'm not going to change the game. I'm going to play the game. And so for me, knowing that I like super rare stuff and I want to chase it in super high grade, look, the Malibu Sun 13 9.8 error that I just sold, prior to it being put in plastic, was already the 9.8 error that I just sold. But how much could I have sold that book for? Maybe 4,000, 5,000 to the right buyer, most likely $2,000. You know, if I say to someone, hey, this error is the cleanest error I've ever seen. If you grade it, you might get a 9.8 out of it. Maybe I could have got a couple thousand, but how foolish would it have been to sell it? Because even a 9.6 I sold for, you know, over $8,000. So maybe I could have gotten more. But the point is,
it isn't what it is until it is.
It isn't what it is until it is. That's just the environment. You know, I was asking 16,000. Here's what I'll say about how much I sold that book for. I was asking 16,000 for it, and the one at Heritage sold for 14,400. I got more than the 14,400, obviously less than the 16,000, right? No way I would have gotten anywhere near that if it wasn't graded as a 9.8, even though it was already that book. So I grade just so that my work in tracking down the highest grade of the rarest book can be verified in a way digestible for an individual that wants to spend that kind of money.
It's validated, right? And it validates your price tag. It validates everything, right?
And the other thing that I want to say about the sort of books that I grade, they're rare and special, whether they're graded or not. If there's a book that has to be encapsulated in order for it to have any value, that is worthless to me. Like, I might like it, but that doesn't mean I'm going to grade it. I might own it raw, but why would I grade that thing? The things that I like transacting, selling, hunting, putting into new collections, connecting people with are books that are special, whether they're graded or not. I just happen to play in an ecosystem where to get the premium has to be graded.
And I mean, let's all be real, right? You as a businessman would be foolish to not grade it at that price delta.
Of course, but that book I could have absolutely had graded with CBCS and still made a great deal of you know, still had a nice sale there, but the premium associated with the CGC census for that particular book is all too real to ignore. And yeah, but still, you know, I won't reach it. It's over there. There are other copies that I have of Malibu Sun, not the errors, that I believe, one of them I believe to be a 9.9. I have not graded it yet. It is raw. It is the closest to perfect copy of that book I've ever owned, I've ever seen, and I've seen dozens and dozens and dozens, not the error, the standard Malibu Sun 13. Why haven't I sent it to CGC yet? Well, because sending one book in doesn't guarantee that I'm going to get a 9.9. There's another stupid game that has to be played.
The comparative grading I absolutely despise. Like, I feel like in that scenario, you're going to be more successful if you send it in with 5 other books that have 9.8 potential, and then they look at those, like, these are 9.8s, but this one does look a little nicer. So that video that they released was such a horrible idea. I don't know why whoever works in their PR ever thought that was a good idea, but awesome. But, go ahead.
No, just bro, it's been a busy year in the world of grading. There's been like situation after situation, and now there's a new one. It might delay things for PSA, but PSA is definitely coming. I'm excited about them. I haven't been grading with CGC. I mean, I you know, there's a few books I've graded months ago that I had to, but other than that, I've just been, you know, putting books away. For I have a nice pile of books on this side that is are books that I look forward to encapsulating with PSA. You know, whenever that comes, sometime hopefully earlier in 2025, earlier than later, but sometime early 2025. Hopefully that happens, because I look forward to putting some, you know, some Mark Jewelers and some PSA slabs, some 316 newsstands and some PSA slabs. I'm going to do some cracking out of CGC and resubmitting the PSA, because I'm going to demand the value that I think the book deserves. And, you know, should I not be able to get that value, it's going to be experimental. We'll see. But I'm going to represent those books proudly, you know, when the time comes to be able to do so. So I look forward to that. Sorry, you were about to say something.
Oh, no, I was just that was just carrying forward what I was going to say. But I was going to say also with that though, we should probably wind this thing down. We're already past the 90-minute mark here. So
Dang. And we essentially, my goodness, dude, I never anticipated to get on with you guys and basically talk grading the entire damn time. But there's been so much going on. It can, and that's not it. That's just to say you guys do a lot more in the space of books that sometimes aren't graded, and I exist a lot more in the space of things that are graded. But again, I know we need to wind down, but since there hasn't been much grading going on, I thought maybe we would spend some time today. We'll do this another day talking about, well, how have I kept myself busy in collecting? There's a fuck ton of stuff I've been buying and collecting that has nothing to do with stuff being graded. There are plenty of valuable things that are fun to hunt and sell, whether they're graded or not.
I know, and I will say I've been privy to some of these things you've bought. I know you haven't wanted to share them yet. So when that day comes, it'll be nice. But
can we get one example of it? Is it OA or just what else?
Well, I have a lot of fun in cards as well, and card grading is still alive and well through PSA. But yeah, there's been some original art. I did acquire my first piece of published art a matter of months ago now, and I haven't shown that yet. And I'm super happy with how that whole thing went. The relationship I developed with the artist, what that piece is, where that piece was from. It's this beautiful painting. It's from my childhood. I own and love the thing that it is of, and now I own the original. It's like,
I'll say, for those internet sleuths out there, based on those clues that Manu just said, you could figure out what it is.
Some people can, and then there's other original art that's come into the collection recently. Slowly dabbling very carefully. It's a new space for me. I learn quickly. I like to absorb as much information as possible, own that information. I like to be well versed if I'm going to be spending that kind of money in the world of art. And so it's been a very interesting environment so far. It's going to continue to become, and it's also a very shady environment, which is not, it's a bad thing, but it's also a fun thing. It makes it really exciting, to have to know who you can trust and what somebody does mean when they say something. It also becomes increasingly important that if you actually want something, to try your best to not involve anyone else in the search of it. Because this interesting thing happens in the world of rare stuff. As soon as they know someone wants it, it's more expensive than if someone didn't want it, right?
Yep.
So it's been a fun environment to navigate. Also, I want to say something else. The big ass Marvel cards happened.
Yeah.
The XLs. And I really love these. So I had a great time, engaging with this set, Marvel Masterpieces XL. It's a reprint of all the 2016 Masterpieces by Joe Jusko. And I have a bunch of the Venoms from the set. I got a bunch of cool stuff from the set. I love it. But I did something that I typically don't. I'm not a big modern Marvel card guy. And I don't put a huge emphasis on certain things that happen in modern Marvel, although I can appreciate and recognize why people enjoy it. I like a different sort of rarity, a different sort of scarcity. The term manufactured scarcity. I would prefer that something becomes scarce over decades, right? I just want it to become scarce because 100 years ago, no one took care of it. Now it's hard to find it. I don't really want someone to make a one of one and all of a sudden everyone goes crazy because they only made one. It's like, all right, well, then you're going to make another one of the same character a week later. Now you got 1,000 one of ones. Who gives a fuck? But I get it though. It's still really fun. And I could say that I've sort of fallen victim to it. I do it responsibly. I do it the way that I do it, but I did purchase my first one of one.
Oh,
okay,
of a modern
set. Yeah, this just happened. And so it's not what I'm about to show you, and I have several of these as well. This is the base Black Cat from the set. And I love this art. And there is no one of one of this particular card, but there's a sort of a one of one. I bought my first printing plate.
Oh, very nice. Yeah.
And so there are obviously 4 printing plates for this card because this is the cyan, the blue. Yeah. There's the magenta, the yellow, and the black, right? And so that's for this card, which is this one. But then there's also a what if version of this card that has the trade dress on it.
Yep.
And so I can
There's plenty plates for that. There's plenty plates for that.
4 of these. So like in this world of one of ones are important. Well, this fucking card has 8 one of ones because there are actually 8 printing plates. So it's not all that You know, it's like, you know what I'm saying? Yes, there's only
That-
one blue one. But
That
there's
is a
other more
whole
than one
that's
blue.
a whole topic too that I could talk for an hour on, and we'll definitely have to. We've talked a little bit, but yeah, that's a sick plate though. I'm a big fan of printing plates, so
It's cool. I'm very happy to have it. It was expensive, but it was just one of those things where I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I want that. Buy it.
nice.
It was one of those things where I made an offer and 5 minutes later I bought it for the full price because I didn't want anyone else to buy
Yeah, I've
it.
done the. I definitely have done that.
But all right, guys, I'll let you guys go. I know I've kept you now.
No, you haven't kept. This has been great, and time just flies when you're having a good time, man.
Yeah.
I
But
appreciate you guys,
but
man.
Manu,
That was fantastic.
thanks for coming on. It's your third time. We're definitely gonna have you on a fourth down the line, my man.
Thank you, my man. Always great to be here. Really great we got to catch up, and I look forward to part 4. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. JP, you want to take us out?
Remember, guys, always believe in yourself. See you in the next episode.
Yes.